So welcome everyone to Language and Learning by Jeff Buck and to this episode of Language Learning Around the World. This is interview number 19, and I'm really excited about today's special guest, Patrick T. Randolph from the USA. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. So Patrick lives with his family in Nebraska and has been teaching ESL and EFL for 28 years, including several years in Japan. He has master's degrees in applied English linguistics and philosophy, and bachelor's degrees in philosophy and Spanish, and a certificate for teaching mindfulness. He's written over 100 articles, and he's the best-selling author of several books, 2 poetry books, Empty Shoes and Father's Philosophy, and an idiom book, Cat Got Your Tongue. He's given over 200 presentations and is an award-winning conference speaker. He's the creator of the Head to Toe method. He's a YouTuber and he's a championship girls volleyball coach. So welcome, Patrick. Thank you for taking the time to come on the show and talk about your experience and expertise. So tell us, Patrick, something about yourself. Who is Patrick?
Okay. I suppose we'll keep it succinct. You could probably define me in one word, which is eclectic.
Okay.
So, meaning I love everything. And I suppose that's all thanks to my parents and then the support of my family, because they kind of let me get involved in coaching and poetry and brain science and anything that I can kind of get my brain on. So I love to learn. I guess that's the key thing. And I keep that child's mind of always being curious. So.
That's important as a teacher, and you've got a lot of experience as a teacher. Why did you decide to become a teacher?
Again, that was probably my dad's influence. I'd wake up early in the morning and I'd see him with a little light on, reading Shakespeare. And then when I was just a tiny kid, he was a university professor, and I'd see him strolling across campus, and I thought, what a cool thing to do is help others and teach and have fun while you're doing it. So, yeah.
So as an ELT, an English language teacher, it's really helpful that we have some experience in language learning ourselves. So tell us about your own eclectic foreign language learning experience and journey.
Okay. I think it probably, I can pinpoint one moment. I was heading off to Spain as a high school exchange student.
Oh, wow.
And Chicago is totally different now, but that was back when the airport was set up where you had people from, former Yugoslavia in the same room as somebody from Puerto Rico, in the same room as somebody from France and Germany. So the international terminal just had tons of languages and people in all sorts of garb, their traditional clothing to Western clothing. And I thought, oh my goodness, I was 17 years old. And that just like blew my mind. And I heard all those different languages. And I thought, man, I'm sold. Give me a language and I want to learn it. Because I was having trouble with Spanish at the time because my high school teacher didn't want to speak Spanish in class.
What?
She called my parents and said, your son is disrupting our class. He constantly wants to speak Spanish. And I'm like, isn't that the point? So, but I got back from Spain. And yeah, then I fell in love with that language. And then my wife's language, Turkish, which I'm still not really good at, but I'm trying to learn. And then I spent some time in Japan. I had to learn that because I had to teach and coach over there. So,
oh, wow.
But I think it was that moment in Chicago at the airport where I just had to be 30 different languages. And I was enamored of just the sounds and the cultures. And I thought, wow, yeah, I'm in.
Sounds great. Yeah. So what can you tell us about your ELT training?
ELT training, that was kind of like an interesting thing too, because I was in grad school actually studying philosophy, and I was wrapping up my master's, and I needed some extra work, and so I started tutoring Japanese students and Korean students and Taiwanese students and Thai students and Mexican students, and I thought, boy, I love philosophy, but I love teaching this English thing because what I realized was I could teach English better with that background in philosophy because I could make the points simple, clear, concise, and coherent. And the students liked it. They'd sign up for a couple weeks with me, and we'd go a whole year. And so I kind of got a little gathering and following. And then around that time, just luck of the draw, a group of Japanese English teachers were getting like extra training in UW-Madison, Wisconsin. And so I became friends with them, and they said, hey, if you love Japanese culture and you want to teach English, why don't you come over here to the JET program? And so they helped me get that set up. And I spent, 5 years in Japan. And so I really cut my teeth on the job training. And so after 6 years in Japan, I realized, okay, I want to make this my profession. And so I came back and went to the same floor and Helen C. White Hall at UW-Madison because the philosophy and the linguistics share the same floor. And so I got my MA in applied linguistics and TESOL.
Nice.
Yeah.
And you've developed something that you call the head to toe method. It sounds really interesting. You told me a little bit about that before. Can you expand on that for a bit?
It's kind of the way because I can't say I speak 8 languages. I can only I've studied them. I can really only speak a couple. But what the head to toe method is, the best way to describe it is it's kind of like a spider web.
Okay.
If a word flies in, I've got so many components that will lock it in the student's brain because it's all built on associations. So I'll describe it. So the method has about 50 components. Now, the teacher and the student in whatever class doesn't have to use those at all. They can just use 2 or 3 if they want. And the reason why there are so many is so that it can fit with any kind of teacher. But whether this teacher is like focusing lessons on physical exercise or brain science or consumer products, whatever it is, they can kind of pull from this web of components. And one specific one is color. So for example, when years ago when I taught the word coherent, which is kind of an abstract term, I asked my students, I said, what color is that? When we learn vocabulary as a child, I'll just take us back parenthetically to when we may have learned apple. So we're in the kitchen, let's say, we can close our eyes and kind of imagine we're in the kitchen, kind of pulling on mom's apron. And there's maybe the smell of autumn in the air and the windows open and the curtains are blowing. And then you look at the counter and you say, what's that? And she says, oh, it's an apple, honey. And then you hold the apple and it's hard. And then maybe she cuts it and the juice drips on your skin. And then you smell it and you taste it. And so all these things are going on in your head. And so those are the associations, I think, when you learn, you learn a word in whatever language. But in the classroom, that's often forgotten because, here's the word and here's the translation and try to lock it in. So I always tell my students, I can't take you back to when you were 2 or 3, but I can kind of create a scenario like that. So going back to coherent, after we did the definition and I asked the students a couple questions about the part of speech, then I said, what color is that word for you? And this was years ago, but it was a Japanese boy and he raised his hand and he said, dark blue. And I said, oh, interesting. Why is coherent dark blue for you? And he said, because my dad is a very coherent Japanese businessman and he does everything from A to Z correctly and in an organized fashion. And he always wears dark blue suits.
Nice.
And I knew that student had a really neat connection with his dad. And so he probably at that same time smelled his dad's cologne, saw his dad's face. And so all these things are now zapping in during the encoding moment when he's learning that word. And it just really helps solidify, takes that abstract term of coherent down to something really concrete in his heart and soul. So kind of in short, that's kind of what it's all about. So there's color. You might relate it to a part of the body, like what part of the body is coherent. And you'd probably say, oh, the brain. Some students said the hands because they use the hand to go from like A, B, C, or A, B, C. So anything in the body that would relate to the word that would help make it tangible and concrete. Yeah.
Yeah. And when we chatted before, you said it was primarily for vocabulary, but it can be used for other aspects of language learning as well. Is that true?
Right. I mean, I kind of focus on vocabulary, but a friend of mine in Maryland said, you could use this with reading. For example, have the students read a poem and ask them what color that poem is, or what maybe even what color that stanza is. And that would lead into other associations that would really help them either remember the poem or make it more meaningful even. Yeah. Same thing with grammar. Like I had this idea with using music with verb tenses. So I'd pick a piece of music that really epitomized the verb tense. Like if it was the present tense, which is really active, maybe, I don't know, Vivaldi's spring in the, and then maybe the present perfect, which is a little more laid back, but still like a chunk of time, maybe something a little more slower, things like that.
Okay, nice. And now I want to talk about your fascinating recent paper on teacher burnout.
Oh yeah.
It's entitled Overcoming Burnout, Livening Up Your Teaching Career with Self-Inquiry and Mindfulness for Personal and Professional Growth. So here's a quote from your paper. The current burnout rate among educators is very high and has increased even more during the past few years. In fact, over 500,000 teachers in the United States leave their jobs each year. Unfortunately, math, science, and language teachers lead these troubling statistics. English language teachers, both domestic and international, are also severely affected by burnout. So what is burnout and what causes it?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, the whole burnout in the paper, I kind of use the basic definition of just, being severely tired and stressed and depressed, and all that's brought on by constant fatigue and exhaustion, and just losing interest in the simplest things. Like maybe you're fascinated with movies, and suddenly watching movies doesn't really flick your switch anymore. And same thing with teaching. You used to love walking in the classroom, and it's like, oh God, I've got to teach another class, and all these things just kind of are like the world on your shoulders. And the research I did in the paper, I mean, there's tons of different reasons that cause burnout, but a lot of it is just the overworked hours that a typical language teacher will put in. Because I mean, with language teaching, it's not just the classroom is the fun part, teaching in the classroom, but you've got the hours of grading, and then the prep time, and then depending upon like K through 12 has so many different meetings, and so does higher ed, and so you've got these other things that you're working on. And then if you're in higher ed too, there's the push to publish or present. And some people love it, like I do. I just love it. But others, it's kind of a, I remember, just parenthetically, I was on the plane to TESOL a few years ago, and I heard somebody say, "Oh God, I've got to present at TESOL," and I'm like, "Oh yes." It's kind of heaven, but not necessarily everybody likes that. But it's just, yeah, the long work hours, and then a lot of times I read a lot of research, and unfortunately there's lack of support from the administration, whether it's emotional support, financial support, or professional support. And then now too, there's the whole idea of maybe the students aren't appreciating you enough. Job dissatisfaction was a huge one, and that had a lot of components. Job dissatisfaction was, yeah, low salary, overworked, having to teach to a test, a standardized test. So whether that's K through 12 with, let's say the ACT, SAT, or some other standardized tests for No Child Left Behind, or
Right.
There's a new system now, I think, that took over No Child
Okay.
Left. But or if it's language learning, some programs are just set up to teach the IELTS or IELTS test, or the whatever, the TOEFL or TESOL or whatever it is. Yeah.
Right.
So.
And then you also in your paper talk about self-inquiry, and as the title also suggests, mindfulness. Can you talk about those?
Yeah. So I took the approach in the paper of starting with self-inquiry. One of the first quotes that I think I fell in love with philosophy when I was in high school too is from the Apology, where Socrates says, "The unexamined life is not worth living." So we kind of start from that and go into the whole idea of, okay, so what is it? Why am I on the process of being burned out, or how can I avoid it? So kind of looking inside, what makes you happy, what's going to make you stressed. So kind of learn as much about yourself as possible. And then kind of a tool of that, if it's kind of hard to do naturally, because it's not an easy thing to go into self-inquiry. I proposed using mindfulness, where there, instead of, you know, when you're making your morning coffee, thinking about your class, when you're making your morning coffee, just be there and, feel the warmth of the mug around your fingers and the steam coming up into your nose, and be in that moment. And it's amazing how something simple like that, you think, well, how is that going to help me? But once you get into mindfulness and try it and really go moment by moment, it's phenomenal how, the stress comes down. Tiny little moments start to have massive importance. And so it's not only a cleansing, but it's just sort of like taking a happy pill without taking any pill,
Right.
So it's like being here. Yeah.
Do you think that stress is inevitable, or that we can apply the techniques that you talk about in your paper and avoid stress altogether? And what can a teacher do? I'll let you answer that first.
Okay. Yeah, there's a quote that I use in the paper from a real neat documentary. Later, I can give you the link and you can have your viewers watch it. It's from ABC Science.
Mhm.
And it's called The Science of Mindfulness. And it's a nice it's only like a 30-minute presentation. But in that, Dr. Richard Chambers makes the quote that I use, that stress isn't in the situation, but it's in your relationship to that situation.
Right.
So whatever terrible thing that let's say you're, there's even a crazy fight that breaks out in a teachers meeting.
Right.
The fight is going. It's a weird thing to think about, but the fight is actually going on. But there's no stress in that moment, really. A fight has stress, but it's how you're reacting to that. So
Okay.
if you're taking in what's going on between two people arguing kind of loudly, yeah, the heart rate might go up, but that's in you. It's not necessarily in that
Okay.
moment. And so a lot of what mindfulness tries to do is, yeah, be that term objective is really hard, because to be honest, all the neuroscience that I've studied, I don't think we can totally be 100% objective, but as much as we can, kind of sit back and look at it, and then just take a deep breath and not let that situation bother you as much as you could. But if you get sucked into it, then
Right.
you're there with everybody else. But if you can take like one step back inside yourself and just observe, then you could be that person in the room saying, hey, okay,
Okay.
let's kind of chill out here, let's relax. And so yeah, so to answer your question, it's always there. There's good stress, like right now when I lift my coffee cup, people don't think of this, but that's good stress, because
Yeah.
I'm stressing my arm and I'm getting a
Right.
little weightlifting in.
Yeah.
When we walk on the ground, we're stressing our bodies in a good way, because we're providing that tension. But then there's the psychological stress that isn't good, where because they've done those studies that cortisol that kicks in when you're, and that's the problem with burnout, is if you're hyper stressed and constantly stressed every day, that just kills the brain cells.
Right.
So unlike exercise or eating chocolate, which makes you happy and and full of bliss, that chronic stress it's just a brain killer, worse than probably anything. It makes alcohol probably look like a kid, because the cortisol is so strong. So it's always there. That's why I think the best, potentially there, stress. And so it's important for us to kind of take that step back and be mindful and kind of control it. And then we start to see that, wow, that stress doesn't necessarily need to control us anymore. We can control that situation.
Okay. Yeah, I was trying to be mindful before we started today, because, as I mentioned in my email to you, I was trying to be mindful about the fact that I was dealing with technical problems before we started our chat and interview today. I was thinking, though, how can a teacher still care about their job in a stressful situation, and be mindful? Meaning, it's one thing just to not care, then there's no stress.
Right,
But
right,
we
right.
as passionate teachers, we want to be passionate, and we want to care about our work and our students. So is there a difference in your mind between just being blasé and not caring, and being still passionate but not being consumed by the stress of the situation?
Huh. Yeah, I get. Yeah, that's a really a great question, a hard one because it's layered in so many. It's like an onion, but I'll see if I can kind of peel it back. Yeah, if you, I mean, being blasé and indifferent, and kind of separating yourself from the world like that, um, yeah, that won't help anybody. It won't help you because you're avoiding it, and it won't help the student. So and but there's that little caveat too, where you're passionate about the student and the teaching, um, but if something is going wrong, they're not picking up the information or the environment or whatever, it can be stressful. So it's kind of, I don't want to say cliche, because to be honest, I don't think anything is cliche. If you are mindful about it, everything has meaning. It might sound quote unquote cliche because it's used a lot, but I think if you take whatever is used in that moment, cliche kind of just falls off. So what I'm getting at is just that whole idea of try to know what you can control and then let go what you can't.
Right.
So let's say, for example, a really bad situation that I actually taught in, where next door they're doing construction. So there's hammers, there's saws, and it's just a nightmare in a way. But you've got 5 students in this room, and it's like, okay, there's that going there, but we got something fun called English going on here. So let's just, I know it's going to be hard for us, but let's just see if we can focus and then help each other out.
Okay.
And it actually worked. I mean, we kind of, at one point I just looked at it and I saw them doing their conversation. I looked at, I said, you guys, you've blotted, you've completely blocked out the noise, haven't you? And they're like, what noise? Oh yeah, the noise. And I was like, oh, cool. So yeah, but so
Yeah.
it's kind of that whole thing about, again, okay, what can I do in this moment and what can't I do? And if I can't do anything, then there's no point in stressing or fixating on it. So just do
Okay.
it.
Perfect. And you'll provide a link so people can access your paper.
Yeah, it's being formatted
Okay.
and reviewed in the final, and then I think probably at the end of this month or latest early next month, um, it'll be uploaded, and I can send that link to you.
Yeah, and I'll add it to the video then.
Yeah.
So continuing with the theme of mindfulness and professionalism, do you have any advice that you would give to people beginning their career in ELT, in terms of important or difficult or rewarding parts of teaching English?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's so much there. I think when we start, we're very idealistic,
Right.
and we have that beginner's mind, that child's mind, and again, I don't think it's cliche at all. It's just hold on to that. Don't let it go. There's this great Japanese philosopher who says the ideal life is to grow old gracefully, but at the same time, simultaneously holding on to that child's heart that you had from birth on. Um, so mature with wisdom throughout the years, but never letting go of that. So that kind of yin yang of the child's heart and the adult kind of working together. And so, because there's a lot of stuff that will pop up
Right.
in our career. I mean, you've got, I mean, sad thing is that, and there are certain cases when you're working with a faculty, there's always the jealousy factor, and people, it's kind of a dog eat dog world sometimes. And I once had a dream. My favorite professor in college came to me in a dream, and it was really weird because he had passed away. And I said, you realize you're a ghost, right? And I can see through you. And he said, that doesn't matter now. I've come here to tell you something very important. I'm like, okay, I'm here to listen. And in the dream, his message was, don't care what the other faculty think. What you're doing is important. It's the students that are important, and what you're doing is great. Just continue doing that, because he himself was an amazing instructor, to the point where, yeah, I think other faculty were kind of jealous of him because the students loved him so much. Um,
Yeah.
and so he had been through that, and and there was at the school I was teaching at, there were some things going on that were really kind of silly because I I was trying to help everybody, but there was people that were kind of, I don't know, it was an odd situation there. But at any rate, I took his advice and I blocked it all out and just kind of focused on what was important. And then there, as a teacher too, there are sometimes things that you have no control over, whether
Right.
it's scheduling or the size
Right.
of the class. And so, but in a way, all of those things that I had no control over ended up making me a better teacher. For example, one time we were in this tiny room and it was packed with students, but I love doing exercise and things. And so I had to create different ways of doing exercise in a tiny class with, 30 students. And
Right.
so whatever you're pushed to do, I think that's what I love about teaching is whatever you're pushed to do when you're limited, you understand that things can become limitless if
Right.
you tweak it the right way. So
Okay. Perfect. And you teach English in Nebraska. Can you tell us about ESL in Nebraska?
yeah, that's a good question because you think of Nebraska. Nebraska is like one language being spoken, uh, uh, monolingual, monocultural. But it's interesting because um, I found out um, since we've been here, because originally I'm from Wisconsin, and Wisconsin is kind of similar too in that sense that you think of it as a sort of a Midwestern state, not much diversity. But in Lincoln itself, I think what was it? There are 150 languages spoken,
Wow.
different languages. And then in the public school system too, um, there there's over 100 um, different nationalities. Because I should preface this too. Lincoln's a refugee relocation center,
Okay.
so when there's an outbreak of whatever happening around the world, they'll accept a certain amount of refugees, and then they can either stay here and start their life and get a job, or they can start here and then apply for citizenship or relocate around the U.S. But a lot of them
Okay.
end up staying here,
Wow.
and so you've got just around the corner you've got you know Russians, Ukrainians, Vietnamese, and Thai and Japanese. Just in
Wow.
yeah. In fact, when my wife and I came to get our driver's license here, when we came to Lincoln a few years ago, we were a four-way intersection, and there were all different nationalities, and we thought, oh my God, are we in Lincoln, Nebraska? And then we realized, okay, we were just at the DMV, and so everybody's trying to get their driver's license. But
Right. But you currently have a lot of Japanese students. So can
right.
we do a little contrastive analysis between English and Japanese? And maybe you can explain a little bit about problems that native Japanese speakers have learning English and problems people would have learning Japanese as a non-native language.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, basically the language, the structure, it's totally shifted. So we have, I eat an apple, but the Japanese syntax is I apple eat. So
Okay.
the verb goes at the end. But they most of, I would say, the adults, they start studying um, English over there officially in junior high school, and so they have a pretty good command of written and um, I'd say written English, and then their reading is amazing. They just have to work on the speaking. But I'm working with the kids, and so they're kind of struggling with they're speaking Japanese at home, and then they're learning English at school. And so I'm sort of their private tutors where I kind of either get their English up to par or add extra things. And it's really cool when I'll teach them certain words, and they'll go to school and talk to their teacher, and the teacher will be like, wow, I forgot about that word. It's a really important word. Thanks for reminding me. And they'll get all excited that they're kind of helping their teacher remember words of importance. And yeah.
And Japanese has actually contributed a lot of words to English. I have a list, but you can share some words that you might be able to think of.
Oh, I mean, the ones that come to mind are like sushi and sumo and geisha and what are they? Oh, it's interesting because I coach volleyball, and I've got a parent that comes in to help sometimes, and we'll say nice dig, passing,
Okay.
and she'll say nice cutto, cutto. So it's a nice cut, but it's with the vowel at the end, nice cutto.
Also, tsunami.
Oh yeah, tsunami. That's right.
You probably said sushi, sake,
Oh yeah.
ramen, bonsai, Sudoku, emoji,
Oh yeah.
futon, and probably more.
Right.
So, how can people contact you and access your material, Patrick?
Well, let's see. A big, um, you can give people my Gmail later.
Okay,
Probably the best way. Um, and then if they want to, I've got a nice little YouTube channel. It's
right,
got currently, I think, 63 videos, and then in the community tab, different interviews that I've given, and a couple other like presentations I've given that people videotaped is on that. So we probably got almost like 70 videos up.
okay,
So and it's kind of nice. It's pretty eclectic. So there's ones on mindfulness, ones on teaching volleyball, a lot on grammar and writing and all sorts of things. So
perfect. So, thank you, Patrick.
Mhm.
Thank you for coming on.
Yeah.
Um, and thank you, everyone, for watching. And be sure to check out Patrick's YouTube channel and also my other language learning around the world interviews. Thank you.
Thank you.